The cruel Duke scorned his patient wife, until a single act of kindness unveiled his hidden pain. Introduction. For 3 years, Lady Eleanor Ashford had endured the cold indifference of her husband, the Duke of Ravensmore. Society whispered that she was too gentle, too plain, too unworthy of his title. But on a rain-soaked evening in their grand estate, when she discovered him collapsed in his study, trembling and broken, she glimpsed something no one else had ever seen. What she learned in that moment would shatter everything she believed about the man who had scorned her and reveal a devastating secret that had poisoned their marriage from the very beginning. If you're listening to this story, don't forget to click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments which part of the world you're listening from. I want to know how far it's traveled. The morning light filtered through the tall windows of Ravensmore Hall, casting long shadows across the breakfast room, where Lady Eleanor Ashford sat alone. Again, the delicate china teacup trembled slightly in her hands as she gazed at the empty chair across from her, the chair that should have been occupied by her husband, Adrian Blackwood, the Duke of Ravensmore. 3 years had passed since their wedding day. 3 years since she had walked down the aisle of St. George's Chapel in London, her heart filled with cautious hope. She had been 19 then, the youngest daughter of the Earl of Pemberton, raised to be dutiful, accomplished, and above all, obedient. Her marriage to the Duke had been arranged by their families, a union that promised to strengthen both houses. Eleanor had accepted her fate with quiet grace, as she had been taught to do. The Duke of Ravensmore was considered one of the most eligible men in England. At 32, he possessed a commanding presence, dark hair that fell rakishly across his forehead and piercing grey eyes that seemed to look through rather than at people. His estate in Derbyshire was magnificent, his wealth considerable, his lineage impeccable. Every mother in London had hoped to secure him for her daughter. Eleanor remembered the first time she had seen him, at a ball hosted by the Duchess of Marlborough. He had stood apart from the crowd, his expression distant and unreadable. When their eyes had met across the ballroom, she had felt a flutter of something she couldn't quite name. Fear, perhaps, or fascination. Their courtship had been brief and formal. Adrian had called upon her father, the arrangements had been made, and within 3 months they were married. Eleanor had entered the marriage with romantic notions carefully cultivated by the novels she read in secret. She had imagined that affection might grow between them, that patience and devotion would eventually soften his reserved nature. She had been wrong. From their wedding night, Adrian had treated her with cold politeness. He fulfilled his marital duties with mechanical efficiency, then retreated to his own chambers. He never sought her company, never asked her opinion, never looked at her with anything resembling warmth. During the day, he occupied himself with estate business, parliamentary duties, and long rides across the countryside. In the evenings, he shut himself in his study with brandy and silence. Eleanor had tried everything. She had learned to manage his household with flawless efficiency, ensuring that every meal was perfectly prepared, every room immaculately maintained. She had studied his interests, reading books on agriculture and politics, so she might converse intelligently should he ever wish to speak with her. She had dressed carefully, always appearing at dinner in elegant gowns, her chestnut hair arranged in the latest fashion. Nothing made any difference. The servants pitied her. She could see it in their eyes, in the way the housekeeper, Mrs. Thornton, would pat her hand sympathetically when delivering the household accounts. Even the villagers in the nearby town of Ashbourne had begun to whisper. The Duke's wife, they said, was a shadow in her own home, a ghost haunting the corridors of Ravensmore Hall. Eleanor set down her teacup and rose from the table, moving to the window that overlooked the gardens. The estate was beautiful, she had to admit. Rolling hills stretched toward the horizon, dotted with ancient oaks. The formal gardens closest to the house were meticulously maintained, with geometric hedges and flower beds that bloomed in carefully planned succession throughout the seasons. But beauty without warmth was merely decoration, and Ravensmore Hall, for all its grandeur, felt like a mausoleum. She pressed her hand against the cool glass, watching as a figure on horseback emerged from the tree line. Adrian, returning from his morning ride. Even from this distance, she could see the rigid set of his shoulders, the controlled precision of his movements. He rode as he did everything else, with perfect form and absolute isolation. Eleanor turned away from the window, her reflection catching in the ornate mirror above the mantelpiece. She studied herself critically. At 22, she was no great beauty, but neither was she plain. Her features were delicate, her hazel eyes large and expressive, her figure slender but well-proportioned. Her greatest flaw, she had decided long ago, was her very ordinariness. She was not dazzling enough, not sophisticated enough, not remarkable enough to capture the attention of a man like Adrian Blackwood. The sound of boots in the entrance hall announced Adrian's return. Eleanor's heart quickened despite herself, that foolish hope that never quite died. Perhaps today he would speak to her. Perhaps today something would change. The breakfast room door opened, and Adrian entered, still in his riding clothes. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and a lean, athletic build. His dark hair was windswept, his cheeks flushed from the cold morning air. For a moment Eleanor thought she saw something flicker in his eyes when he looked at her, but it was gone so quickly she might have imagined it. "Good morning," she said softly, her voice steady despite the nervous flutter in her chest. "Madam," he replied, his tone formal and distant. He moved to the sideboard, helping himself to coffee without looking at her again. Eleanor clasped her hands together, gathering her courage. "The weather is quite fine today. I thought perhaps we might walk in the gardens after breakfast." Adrian's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I have business to attend to in the study. The estate manager is coming at 10. "Of course," Eleanor said, the familiar ache of rejection settling in her chest. "Perhaps another time." He said nothing, merely took his coffee and left the room, leaving Eleanor alone once more with the silence and the shadows. That evening, as was customary, Eleanor dressed for dinner in a gown of deep blue silk that brought out the colour of her eyes. She descended the grand staircase at precisely 7 o'clock, entering the dining room, where Adrian already sat, at the head of the long mahogany table. She took her place at the opposite end, an expanse of polished wood and silver candelabras stretching between them. The meal proceeded in silence, broken only by the soft clink of cutlery against china. Eleanor had long ago stopped attempting conversation during these dinners. Adrian made it clear through his monosyllabic responses that he had no interest in her thoughts or observations. As the footman cleared the main course, Eleanor noticed something unusual. Adrian's hand, normally so steady as he lifted his wineglass, trembled slightly. His face, always pale, seemed even more drawn than usual, and there were dark circles beneath his eyes. "Are you unwell?" she asked, concern overriding her usual caution. Adrian's eyes snapped to hers, and for a moment she saw something raw and unguarded in their depths. Then the shutters came down again, and his expression returned to its customary coldness. "I am perfectly well," he said curtly. "You need not concern yourself with my health." The rebuke stung, as it always did, but Eleanor persisted. "You look tired. Perhaps you should retire early this evening." "I said I am well," Adrian repeated, his voice harder now. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I have work to do. Good night, madam." He left without waiting for her response, his footsteps echoing through the hall as he retreated to his study. Eleanor sat alone at the table, the untouched dessert course growing cold before her, and wondered how much longer she could endure this half-life, this marriage that was not truly a marriage at all. 3 weeks later, Eleanor stood in her dressing room, preparing for the most important social event of the season. The Duke and Duchess of Devonshire were hosting their annual autumn ball at Chatsworth House, and attendance was mandatory for anyone of consequence in Derbyshire society. It would be the first major social gathering Eleanor and Adrian had attended together in over a year. Her lady's maid Mary fastened the last button on Eleanor's gown. a creation of ivory silk and Belgian lace that had been commissioned specifically for the occasion. The bodice was embroidered with tiny seed pearls, and the skirt fell in elegant folds to the floor. Eleanor's hair had been arranged in an elaborate style, with curls framing her face and a small diamond tiara nestled among the chestnut waves. "You look beautiful, my lady," Mary said with genuine warmth. "His Grace will be proud to have you on his arm." Eleanor smiled weakly, knowing better than to harbour such hopes. Adrian would tolerate her presence because propriety demanded it, nothing more. The journey to Chatsworth took nearly 2 hours in the ducal carriage. Eleanor and Adrian sat across from each other in silence, the leather seats creaking with every bump in the road. Adrian stared out the window, his profile illuminated by the late afternoon sun. Eleanor studied him covertly, noting again the tension in his jaw, the way his hands gripped the head of his walking stick with white-knuckled intensity. Chatsworth House blazed with light as they approached, its Palladian facade magnificent against the darkening sky. Carriages lined the drive, disgorging elegantly dressed ladies and gentlemen who climbed the grand steps to the entrance. The sound of music and laughter drifted through the open doors. Adrian handed Eleanor down from the carriage with perfunctory courtesy, offering his arm as they entered the house. His touch was impersonal, his body held stiffly apart from hers. Eleanor felt the familiar ache of loneliness, even as they moved together through the crowded reception rooms. The ballroom was spectacular, lit by 3 enormous crystal chandeliers and decorated with thousands of white roses. The cream of Derbyshire society filled the space, their jewels glittering, their voices rising in animated conversation. Eleanor recognized many faces, some friendly, others merely curious. She knew what they said about her marriage, the pitying whispers that followed her wherever she went. The Duchess of Devonshire, a formidable woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and an even sharper wit, greeted them warmly. "Ravensmoor, how delightful to see you. And Lady Eleanor, you look absolutely lovely this evening." "Your Grace is too kind," Eleanor murmured, curtsying. "Nonsense. I always speak the truth, as you well know." The Duchess turned to Adrian. "I trust you'll do your duty and dance with your wife this evening, Ravensmoor. It's been far too long since we've seen you both together in society." Adrian's expression remained impassive. "Of course, Your Grace." But as the evening progressed, Adrian made no move to claim Eleanor for a dance. He stood with a group of gentlemen near the card room, discussing politics and estate management, while Eleanor sat with the matrons and wallflowers, watching the dancers swirl past in a kaleidoscope of colour. Lady Pemberton, Eleanor's mother, approached with concern etched on her face. "My dear, why are you not dancing? Surely Adrian—" "He is occupied with business matters, Mama," Eleanor said quietly. "You know how he is." Her mother's lips pressed into a thin line. "This is not acceptable, Eleanor. A husband should attend to his wife, especially in public. People are beginning to talk." "People have always talked, Mama." Before her mother could respond, a commotion near the entrance drew everyone's attention. A latecomer had arrived, and the crowd parted to admit her. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. Lady Vivian Ashcroft swept into the ballroom like a queen. She was everything Eleanor was not. Tall, voluptuous, with raven black hair and emerald eyes that sparkled with confidence and sensuality. Her gown of deep crimson silk clung to her curves, cut daringly low at the bodice. She moved with the assurance of a woman who knew her power, who had never doubted her ability to command attention. Eleanor felt her stomach drop as she saw Adrian's reaction. He had gone completely still, his face draining of colour. His hand tightened around his glass until Eleanor feared it might shatter. Lady Vivian's gaze swept the room and landed on Adrian. A slow, knowing smile curved her lips. She began moving toward him, the crowd parting before her like the Red Sea before Moses. Eleanor's mother gripped her arm. "Who is that woman?" "Lady Vivian Ashcroft," whispered Lady Thornbury, an elderly countess who never missed an opportunity for gossip. "The widow of Lord Ashcroft." She's been living in London these past 5 years. I'm surprised to see her here. There was quite a scandal." She fell silent as Vivian reached Adrian's group. The other gentleman bowed, but Adrian remained frozen, his eyes locked on Vivian's face. "Your Grace," Vivian said, her voice carrying across the suddenly quiet ballroom. "How wonderful to see you again after all these years. I trust you've been well." Adrian's response was barely audible. "Lady Ashcroft." "Oh, we needn't be so formal, surely, not after everything we once meant to each other." Vivian's smile widened, and Eleanor saw the cruelty in it, the deliberate provocation. The ballroom had gone silent. Every eye was fixed on the scene unfolding before them. Eleanor felt as though she couldn't breathe, as though the stays of her corset had suddenly become too tight. Vivian turned, her gaze finding Eleanor across the room. "And this must be your wife. How charming. Tell me, Your Grace, does she know about us? About what we shared before you were forced to give me up?" The words hung in the air, like poison. Eleanor saw Adrian's face contort with something between rage and anguish. She saw the avid interest on every face around her, the gleeful anticipation of scandal. "That is enough," Adrian said, his voice low and dangerous. "Is it?" Vivian laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "I think not. I think it's time the truth came out. Tell her, Adrian. Tell your little mouse of a wife why you can barely stand to look at her. Tell her who you really wanted to marry." Adrian's control shattered. "You have no right." "I have every right. You loved me. You promised yourself to me, and then your father interfered, forced you into a marriage with this insipid girl, because her dowry was larger and her family more politically useful. You sacrificed our love for duty, and look what it's brought you, a cold marriage and a lifetime of regret." Eleanor stood, her legs shaking beneath her. Every eye in the ballroom turned to her. She saw pity, curiosity, and schadenfreude on the faces around her. Her mother reached for her, but Eleanor pulled away, moving through the crowd toward the door. She heard Adrian call her name, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. The humiliation was too great, the pain too raw. She had known Adrian didn't love her, had accepted that truth long ago. But to learn that he had loved someone else, that their marriage had destroyed his chance at happiness, that every cold look and cruel silence had been born of resentment, it was more than she could bear. Eleanor fled through the corridors of Chatsworth, her vision blurred with tears. She found herself in a small anteroom, empty and dark, and collapsed onto a settee, her carefully constructed composure finally breaking. Great, wrenching sobs tore from her chest as 3 years of loneliness and rejection poured out of her. She didn't know how long she sat there before the door opened. She looked up, expecting her mother or perhaps a concerned servant. Instead, Adrian stood in the doorway, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. "Eleanor, don't," she said, her voice breaking. "Please, just don't. You must understand." "I understand perfectly." Eleanor stood, wiping at her tears with trembling hands. "You loved her. You wanted her. And you were forced to marry me instead. I've been nothing but a burden to you, a constant reminder of what you lost." Adrian's hands clenched at his sides. "It's not that simple, isn't it?" Eleanor laughed bitterly. "For 3 years, I've tried to be a good wife to you. I've been patient, dutiful, understanding. I've endured your coldness, your indifference, your contempt. And all this time, it was because I wasn't her." "Eleanor, please. I want to leave," she said, her voice steady now, hardened by pain. "I want to go home, and then I want you to leave me alone, completely alone. I cannot endure this anymore." She pushed past him, her head held high despite the tears still streaming down her face. Behind her, she heard Adrian say her name once more, but she didn't turn back. She had spent 3 years hoping for something that would never come. It was time to stop hoping and start surviving. Eleanor stood at the window of her bedchamber at Ravensmoor Hall, watching the autumn rain streak down the glass. 2 weeks had passed since the catastrophic ball at Chatsworth, 2 weeks during which she had barely left her rooms. Adrian had honoured her request for solitude, though she occasionally glimpsed him from her window, riding out across the estate with the same rigid posture, the same air of isolation. The scandal had spread through Derbyshire society like wildfire. Eleanor's mother had written 3 times, her letters full of concern and advice. The general consensus seemed to be that Eleanor should maintain her dignity, hold her head high, and pretend nothing had happened. That was what ladies of quality did, after all. They endured, but Eleanor was tired of enduring. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, expecting Mary with her afternoon tea. Instead, Mrs. Thornton entered, carrying a silver salver with a single letter upon it. "This arrived by special messenger, my lady, from London." Eleanor took the letter, recognizing the elegant handwriting immediately. Lady Beatrice Hartwell, her father's sister, whom Eleanor had always called Aunt B. She was a widow of independent means who lived in a fashionable townhouse in Mayfair and was known for her unconventional views and sharp intellect. Eleanor broke the seal and read, "My dearest Eleanor, I have heard of the unfortunate events at Chatsworth. Your mother has written to me in great distress, though I suspect her distress is more for the scandal than for your happiness. I am writing to extend an invitation, or rather to issue a summons. You will come to London immediately and stay with me for the winter season. I will brook no refusal. You have buried yourself in that gloomy pile in Derbyshire for 3 years, and it has done you no good whatsoever. It is time you remembered that you are more than the Duke of Ravensmore's neglected wife. You are an intelligent, capable young woman who deserves better than to waste away in lonely misery. I expect you within the week. Your affectionate aunt, Beatrice." Eleanor read the letter twice, feeling something stir in her chest that she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope, perhaps, or simply the desire for change. "Mrs. Thornton," she said slowly, "please have Mary begin packing my things. I'm going to London." The housekeeper's eyes widened. "Does His Grace know, my lady?" "His Grace will be informed," Eleanor said, her voice firmer than it had been in weeks. "But the decision is mine, not his." 3 days later, Eleanor sat in the ducal carriage as it rolled through the gates of Ravensmore Hall. She had written a brief note to Adrian, informing him of her plans. He had not responded, though she had seen him watching from the study window as her trunks were loaded. The journey to London took 2 days, with an overnight stop at a coaching inn in Leicester. Eleanor spent the hours staring out the window, watching the countryside give way to towns and villages, and finally to the sprawling metropolis of London itself. Aunt Beatrice's townhouse in Berkeley Square was elegant and welcoming, with large windows that let in abundant light and rooms decorated in the latest fashion. Beatrice herself was waiting at the door when Eleanor arrived, a tall, handsome woman in her 50s with silver-streaked auburn hair and keen blue eyes. "My dear child," she said, embracing Eleanor warmly, "you look absolutely dreadful. Come inside at once. We have much work to do." Over tea in the drawing room, Eleanor found herself telling Aunt Beatrice everything: the loneliness of her marriage, Adrian's coldness, the humiliation at Chatsworth, and the revelation about Lady Vivian Ashcroft. Beatrice listened without interruption, her expression growing increasingly stern. "Men," she said finally with considerable disgust. "They are children, all of them, wallowing in their own misery and taking no responsibility for the pain they cause. Your husband is a fool, Eleanor. Whatever his reasons for treating you so abominably, they are no excuse." "He loved her," Eleanor said quietly. "Lady Vivienne. He wanted to marry her, and his father forced him to marry me instead. And so he punished you for a decision that was not yours to make. That is the behavior of a coward and a bully." Beatrice set down her teacup with a sharp click. "You have wasted 3 years of your life trying to win the affection of a man who was determined to withhold it. That ends now." "What do you mean?" "I mean that you will spend this winter rediscovering yourself. You will attend lectures and exhibitions. You will meet interesting people who value intelligence and conversation. You will remember that you have worth beyond your role as the Duchess of Ravensmoor." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. "I don't know if I can." "You can, and you will. Because the alternative is to return to that mausoleum in Derbyshire and slowly die of loneliness, and I will not permit it." True to her word, Aunt Beatrice immediately set about reintroducing Eleanor to London society, but not the glittering, superficial world of balls and routs. Instead, she took Eleanor to literary salons, scientific lectures and art exhibitions. She introduced her to writers, physicians, reformers and intellectuals who discussed ideas rather than gossip. At first, Eleanor felt overwhelmed and out of place. She had been trained to be ornamental, not intellectual, but gradually she found herself drawn into conversations, her natural curiosity awakening after years of dormancy. She discovered that she had opinions about literature, about social reform, about the role of women in society. And more surprisingly, she discovered that people were interested in hearing those opinions. It was at one of these gatherings, a lecture on advances in surgical techniques at the Royal Society of Medicine, that Eleanor first met Dr. James Whitmore. He was a young physician, perhaps 30 years old, with sandy hair, warm brown eyes, and an earnest manner that put people immediately at ease. He had recently returned from Vienna, where he had studied new methods for treating infections. Eleanor found herself seated next to him during the lecture, and afterward they fell into conversation about the speaker's theories. Dr. Whitmore was impressed by Eleanor's intelligent questions and her genuine interest in the subject. "You have a scientific mind, Your Grace," he said with a smile. "That's a rare quality and one to be valued." Eleanor felt herself blush. "You're very kind, but I'm merely curious. I have no formal education in such matters. Curiosity is the beginning of all knowledge. And please call me James. We're not so formal in scientific circles." Over the following weeks, Eleanor found herself encountering Dr. Whitmore frequently at various lectures and gatherings. He always greeted her warmly, always made time to discuss whatever topic was being presented. He treated her as an intellectual equal, never condescending or dismissive. It was a novel experience, and Eleanor found herself looking forward to these encounters with an anticipation she hadn't felt in years. One afternoon, as they walked through the British Museum after a lecture on Egyptian antiquities, James asked her about her life in Derbyshire. "It must be very different from London," he said. "More peaceful, I imagine." "Peaceful," Eleanor repeated, the word tasting bitter on her tongue. "Yes, I suppose that's one word for it. Lonely would be another." James glanced at her, his expression sympathetic. "Forgive me if I'm overstepping, but you don't seem happy when you speak of your home." Eleanor hesitated, then decided there was no point in pretense. "My marriage is not what I had hoped it would be. My husband and I are strangers to each other." "I'm sorry," James said quietly. "That must be very difficult." "It is what it is. Many marriages are arrangements of convenience rather than affection. I was foolish to expect otherwise." "I don't think it's foolish to hope for kindness and companionship in marriage. Those are reasonable expectations, not romantic fantasies." Eleanor felt tears threaten and blinked them back. "You're very kind to say so." They walked in silence for a moment. Then James said, "I grew up in Yorkshire, in a small village. My father was the local physician, and I always knew I would follow in his footsteps. But I also knew I wanted more than a country practice. I wanted to learn, to discover new treatments, to make a real difference. So I left home, studied in Edinburgh and Vienna, and now I work at St. Bartholomew's Hospital here in London." "Do you regret leaving?" Eleanor asked. "Sometimes. I miss the simplicity of village life, the sense of community. But I don't regret pursuing my own path, even though it meant disappointing my father's expectations. We only have one life, Your Grace. We should live it according to our own values, not someone else's." His words resonated with Eleanor in a way she couldn't quite articulate. That evening, as she sat with Aunt Beatrice in the drawing room, she found herself thinking about James's philosophy. "You seem thoughtful," Beatrice observed, looking up from her book. "I was thinking about choices," Eleanor said slowly, "about how we make them, and what we sacrifice when we let others make them for us." Beatrice smiled. "You're beginning to wake up, my dear. Good. It's about time." Christmas approached, and with it came an invitation that Eleanor had been dreading. The Marchioness of Lansdowne was hosting her annual winter ball, the most prestigious social event of the London season. Attendance was expected of anyone with a title, and Eleanor's absence would be noted and remarked upon. "You must go," Aunt Beatrice said firmly when Eleanor expressed her reluctance. "You cannot hide forever. Besides, it's time society saw the new Eleanor Ashford, not the timid mouse who fled from Chatsworth in tears." "I'm not sure there is a new Eleanor," Eleanor said doubtfully. "Nonsense. You've spent 2 months rediscovering your intelligence and your worth. Now it's time to show the world what you've learned." On the night of the ball, Eleanor dressed with more care than she had in months. Her gown was of deep emerald silk that brought out the green flecks in her hazel eyes. Her hair was arranged in an elegant style that framed her face, and she wore the Ravensmoor emeralds, a magnificent set that had belonged to Adrian's mother. She looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. There was a confidence in her bearing that hadn't been there before, a quiet strength in her eyes. Lansdowne House was ablaze with light and music when Eleanor and Beatrice arrived. The ballroom was packed with the cream of London society, all dressed in their finest. Eleanor felt her stomach tighten with anxiety as they entered, but Beatrice squeezed her arm reassuringly. "Head high, my dear. You are the Duchess of Ravensmoor. You have every right to be here." They had barely entered the ballroom when Eleanor heard a familiar voice behind her. "Eleanor." She turned, her heart lurching. Adrian stood there looking as handsome and remote as ever in his black evening clothes. But there was something different about him, something in his eyes that she couldn't quite identify. He looked thinner than she remembered, and there were new lines around his mouth. "Your Grace," she said coolly, curtsying with perfect formality. Adrian's jaw tightened. "I didn't know you were in London. I saw no reason to inform you of my whereabouts. You made it clear at Ravensmoor that you preferred not to be troubled with my presence." "That's not—" Adrian stopped, glancing at the curious faces around them. "Might we speak privately?" "I think not. I'm here to enjoy the ball, not to engage in uncomfortable conversations." Eleanor turned to Beatrice. "Aunt, shall we find our seats?" As they moved away, Eleanor felt Adrian's eyes on her back, but she didn't turn around. Her heart was pounding, but she kept her head high and her expression serene. The evening progressed, and Eleanor found herself surrounded by acquaintances from the intellectual circles she had been frequenting. Dr. James Whitmore was there, looking distinguished in his evening clothes, and he immediately claimed her for a dance. "You look radiant this evening, Your Grace," he said as they moved through the steps of a waltz. "Thank you, James. You're very kind. I'm merely observant. London has been good for you. You seem happier than when you first arrived." "I am happier. I've remembered what it feels like to be valued for my mind rather than merely tolerated for my title." James smiled. "Any man who merely tolerates you is a fool." Eleanor felt herself blush, aware of the many eyes watching them. She knew what people would say, knew that her friendship with James would be fodder for gossip, but she found she didn't care. For the first time in years, she was enjoying herself at a social gathering. As the waltz ended, James escorted her back to where Beatrice sat with a group of older ladies. Eleanor was about to sit down when a voice cut through the chatter around them. "How touching! The neglected Duchess has found herself a new companion." Eleanor turned to find Lady Vivienne Ashcroft standing behind her, resplendent in a gown of black silk that clung to her curves. Her emerald eyes glittered with malice. "Lady Ashcroft," Eleanor said evenly, "I didn't realize you were in London." "Oh, I go where the entertainment is, and watching you play at Independence is quite entertaining indeed." Vivian's gaze flicked to James. Tell me, doctor, does the Duchess speak of her husband when you're alone together? Does she confess how desperately she's tried to win his affection, only to fail at every turn? James's expression hardened. I think you should leave, madam. You're being deliberately cruel. Cruel? I'm being honest. Something this family seems incapable of. Vivian turned back to Eleanor. You must know that Adrian will never love you. He can't. His heart belongs to me, as it always has. Your little sojourn in London, your pathetic attempts to reinvent yourself, they change nothing. You're still the unwanted wife, the obstacle between us. Eleanor felt the old pain rise up, threatening to overwhelm her. But then she remembered Beatrice's words, remembered the strength she had found over the past 2 months. She drew herself up to her full height and looked Vivian directly in the eye. You're wrong, she said quietly. I'm not an obstacle. I'm a person with my own thoughts, my own worth, my own life. And I'm done allowing you or anyone else to make me feel small. If Adrian cannot love me, that is his loss, not my failure. I deserve better than to spend my life begging for scraps of affection from a man who refuses to give them. The words rang out in the suddenly quiet space around them. Eleanor saw shock on Vivian's face, approval on Beatrice's, and something like admiration on James's. And then she saw Adrian, standing at the edge of the crowd, his face white and his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Vivian recovered quickly, her expression twisting with anger. How dare you? No! Eleanor interrupted. How dare you? You have spent years tormenting me, using me as a weapon against Adrian, trying to destroy what little peace either of us might have found. But I'm done being your victim. I'm done being anyone's victim. She turned to Beatrice. I'd like to leave now if you don't mind. Of course, my dear. Beatrice rose, taking Eleanor's arm. As they moved toward the door, James fell into step beside them. May I call on you tomorrow? He asked quietly. I'd like to ensure you're all right. That would be very kind, Eleanor said. Thank you, James. They were almost to the door when Adrian appeared in front of them, blocking their path. His face was a mask of conflicting emotions, his hands clenched at his sides. Eleanor, please. We need to talk. We have nothing to discuss, Your Grace. You're wrong. There's so much I need to explain, so much you don't understand. Then perhaps you should have explained it 3 years ago, instead of treating me like a burden you were forced to bear. Eleanor's voice was steady, but her eyes blazed with suppressed emotion. You had countless opportunities to be honest with me, to treat me with basic human kindness. You chose not to. You chose to punish me for circumstances beyond my control. And now you want to talk? Now, when I've finally found the strength to stop caring. You don't mean that, Adrian said, his voice rough. Don't I? You don't know what I mean, Adrian. You've never bothered to know me at all. Eleanor stepped around him. Excuse me, I'm leaving. This time Adrian didn't try to stop her, but as Eleanor walked away, she felt his eyes on her back, and she heard him say so quietly she almost missed it, I'm sorry. She didn't turn around. The next morning, James called at Berkeley Square as promised. Eleanor received him in the drawing room, where Beatrice discreetly left them alone after a few minutes of polite conversation. I wanted to make sure you were all right after last night, James said, his brown eyes warm with concern. That woman was unconscionably rude. Lady Ashcroft has always been cruel, but for the first time, her cruelty didn't wound me as deeply as it once would have. Eleanor smiled slightly. I think I'm finally learning to value myself, regardless of what others think. I'm glad. You deserve to be valued. James hesitated, then said, Eleanor, I hope I'm not overstepping, but I've come to care for you a great deal over these past months. Not as a patient or a casual acquaintance, but as a friend. Perhaps even more than a friend. Eleanor's heart skipped. James, I know your situation is complicated. You're married, and I would never ask you to compromise your honor. But I want you to know that when I look at you, I see a remarkable woman. Intelligent, kind, resilient. Any man would be fortunate to have your affection. Tears pricked Eleanor's eyes. You're a good man, James. Better than I deserve. That's not true. But I'll say no more on the subject. I simply wanted you to know that you're valued, Eleanor. Truly valued. After James left, Eleanor sat alone in the drawing room, her thoughts in turmoil. She was drawn to James. She couldn't deny it. His kindness, his respect for her intellect, his genuine interest in her thoughts and feelings, all of it was intoxicating after years of neglect. But she was still married to Adrian, still bound by vows she had taken in good faith, and despite everything, despite the pain and the loneliness and the humiliation, some small part of her still wondered about the man she had married. What had driven him to such cruelty? What pain lay beneath his cold exterior, and why, after 3 years of indifference, did he suddenly seem to care? Winter deepened, and London society buzzed with gossip about the Duke and Duchess of Ravensmore. Some said the Duchess had taken a lover. Others claimed the Duke was finally showing remorse for his treatment of his wife. Still others predicted a scandalous divorce. Eleanor tried to ignore the whispers, but they followed her everywhere. She continued to attend lectures and salons, continued to see James regularly, though always with Beatrice as chaperone. She had no desire to give the gossips any real ammunition. Adrian, meanwhile, had taken up residence at his London townhouse in Grosvenor Square. Eleanor knew this because he had begun sending her letters, long, anguished missives that she read once and then locked away in a drawer. In them, he apologized for his behavior, begged for a chance to explain, pleaded for her forgiveness. But he never came to Berkeley Square in person, and Eleanor didn't respond to his letters. Then, on a cold January evening, everything changed. Eleanor had attended a lecture on prison reform at the Society for the Improvement of Social Conditions. The speaker had been passionate and eloquent, and Eleanor had been deeply moved by his descriptions of the appalling conditions in London's prisons. She and James had discussed the lecture at length afterward, and it was nearly midnight when Beatrice's carriage dropped her at Berkeley Square. The house was dark, except for a single light in the drawing room. Eleanor frowned, wondering why Beatrice was still awake. She entered quietly, removing her cloak and gloves in the entrance hall. As she approached the drawing room, she heard voices. Beatrice was speaking, her tone sharp and disapproving. And then she heard another voice, one that made her freeze in the doorway. "Adrian, you have no right to be here," Beatrice was saying. "Eleanor has made it clear she doesn't wish to see you." "I know, but I can't leave things as they are. I need to speak with her to explain." "Explain what?" "How you systematically destroyed your wife's spirit over 3 years, how you punished her for circumstances beyond her control, how you allowed another woman to publicly humiliate her." "I know what I've done," Adrian said, his voice raw with emotion. "God knows I'm aware of every cruel word, every cold look, every moment I made her feel worthless, but she needs to understand why. She needs to know the truth." "The truth?" Beatrice's voice dripped with scorn. "The truth is that you're a coward who couldn't face his own pain, so you inflicted it on an innocent young woman instead." "You're right," Adrian said quietly. "You're absolutely right. But there's more to it than that. Things Eleanor doesn't know. Things I've never told anyone." Eleanor stepped into the room. Both Adrian and Beatrice turned to look at her, surprise on both their faces. "Then perhaps it's time you told someone," Eleanor said, her voice steady despite the rapid beating of her heart. Adrian rose from his chair, his eyes fixed on her face. He looked terrible, Eleanor thought, thinner than ever, with dark circles under his eyes and a haunted expression that made him look years older. "Eleanor," he said, "I didn't know you were home." "Clearly. Aunt Beatrice, would you excuse us? I think His Grace and I need to speak privately." Beatrice looked between them, her expression concerned. "Are you certain, my dear?" "I'm certain. Whatever he has to say, I need to hear it." After Beatrice left, closing the door behind her, Eleanor sat down in the chair opposite Adrian. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other across the space that separated them. "You wanted to explain," Eleanor said finally. "So explain." Adrian drew a deep breath, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. "I don't know where to begin. The beginning is usually best." "The beginning," Adrian laughed bitterly. The beginning was 20 years ago when I was 12 years old. My mother died that year. Did you know that? Eleanor shook her head. You never spoke of her. I never spoke of anything that mattered. That was my father's training. Blackwood men don't show emotion, don't admit weakness, don't allow themselves to feel. My mother's death nearly destroyed me, but my father forbade me to grieve. He said it was unseemly, that a duke's heir must be strong. Adrian's voice was flat, emotionless, but Eleanor could see the pain in his eyes. I learned to bury my feelings, to present a cold, controlled exterior to the world. It became second nature, and then, when I was 28, I met Vivian. Eleanor flinched at the name, but Adrian continued. She was everything my father would have disapproved of, passionate, impulsive, uncontrolled. Being with her felt like breaking free from a prison I'd been locked in my entire life. For the first time since my mother died, I allowed myself to feel. I thought I was in love. You were in love, Eleanor said quietly. She said as much at Chatsworth. I thought I was, Adrian corrected. But what I felt for Vivian wasn't love. It was obsession, desperation, a drowning man clutching at anything that might save him. And when my father discovered our relationship, when he threatened to disinherit me, unless I gave her up and married someone suitable, I broke. Adrian stood, pacing to the window. His reflection in the dark glass looked like a ghost. I should have fought for her if I truly loved her. I should have chosen her over duty, over my inheritance, over everything. But I didn't. I let my father dictate my life once again. I married you, Eleanor, because you were suitable. Because you came with a generous dowry and useful political connections. Because you were everything Vivian wasn't. Quiet, obedient, controllable. The words should have hurt, but Eleanor found they didn't. She had known all of this, or guessed it. Hearing it spoken aloud merely confirmed what she had always suspected. And then, you punished me for it, he said. Yes. Adrian turned to face her, and Eleanor saw tears on his cheeks. I punished you for my own weakness. Every time I looked at you, I saw a reminder of my cowardice, of the life I'd given up, and I hated myself for it. So I made you hate me instead. I never hated you, Eleanor said softly. I was hurt, confused, lonely, but I never hated you. You should have. God knows you had cause. Adrian returned to his chair, sitting down heavily. But there's more. Something I've never told anyone, not even my father. He fell silent, and Eleanor waited, sensing that whatever came next would be the heart of the matter. The night before our wedding, Adrian said finally, Vivian came to see me. She begged me not to go through with the marriage. She said she loved me, that we could run away together, start a new life somewhere far from England, and I almost said yes. For one moment I almost chose her. Adrian's hands were shaking. Eleanor had never seen him so vulnerable, so stripped of his usual control. But then she said something that changed everything. She said, once you're rid of that insipid girl, we can be together. And I realized that Vivian didn't love me. She loved the idea of me, the title, the wealth, the status. She wanted to be the Duchess of Ravensmore. She didn't care about the man beneath the title. Eleanor felt a chill run through her. What did you do? I sent her away. I told her I would marry you as planned, and that she and I were finished. She was furious. She said I would regret it, that she would make sure I never forgot what I'd given up. And she kept her word. For 3 years, she's been a ghost haunting my marriage, a constant reminder of my failure. But why did you take it out on me? Eleanor asked, her voice breaking. I did nothing wrong. I entered our marriage in good faith, hoping for at least kindness and respect. Why did you deny me even that? Adrian looked at her, and Eleanor saw anguish in his eyes. Because I was afraid. Afraid of what? Afraid that if I let myself care for you, if I allowed myself to feel anything for you, I would be vulnerable again. Afraid that you would see through my carefully constructed walls and realize how weak I truly am. Afraid that I would fail you the way I failed Vivian. The way I failed my mother, by not being strong enough to grieve for her properly. He leaned forward, his voice urgent now. So I kept you at a distance. I told myself it was better that way, that you couldn't be hurt by me if I never let you close. But I was wrong. I hurt you more by my absence than I ever could have by my presence. And by the time I realized what I'd done, by the time I understood that you deserved so much better than I was giving you, it was too late. You'd already given up on me. Eleanor sat in silence, processing everything Adrian had said. Part of her wanted to rage at him, to tell him that his explanations changed nothing, that 3 years of cruelty couldn't be erased by a single confession. But another part of her, the part that had spent 2 months rediscovering her own strength and worth, recognized the courage it had taken for him to bare his soul this way. "You're right," she said finally. "I have given up on you. Or rather, I've given up on the idea that I can somehow earn your love or fix whatever is broken in our marriage. I've spent 3 years trying to be enough for you, and I've finally realized that the problem was never me. It was you, and your inability to move past your own pain." Adrian nodded, his expression bleak. "I know, and I don't expect your forgiveness. I just needed you to know the truth. I needed you to understand that my cruelty had nothing to do with your worth and everything to do with my own cowardice." Eleanor stood, moving to the window where Adrian had stood moments before. Outside, snow was beginning to fall, coating Berkeley Square in white. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. "That's up to you," Adrian said. "I won't force you to return to Ravensmoor. I won't demand that you play the role of dutiful wife. You deserve to be happy, Eleanor. Even if that happiness doesn't include me." Eleanor turned to look at him. "And what about you? What do you want?" "I want a chance to be the husband I should have been from the beginning. I want to know you, really know you, not just as an obligation, but as a person. I want to earn your trust, your respect, perhaps even your affection. But I understand if that's impossible. I understand if I've destroyed any chance we might have had." Eleanor felt tears on her own cheeks now. "I don't know if I can trust you again, Adrian. You hurt me so deeply. I know, and I will spend the rest of my life regretting it." Adrian stood, moving toward the door. "I'll leave you in peace. But Eleanor, please know this. You are remarkable. You are intelligent, kind, resilient, and worthy of love. If I couldn't see that, the fault was mine, not yours. Never yours." He left before Eleanor could respond, the door closing softly behind him. Eleanor stood alone in the drawing room, her mind whirling with conflicting emotions. Adrian's confession had answered so many questions, had explained so much of his behavior. But did understanding equal forgiveness? Could she ever trust him again? And what about James, who had shown her nothing but kindness and respect, who valued her for herself, not for her title or her connections? Eleanor didn't have the answers. But for the first time in 3 years, she felt that perhaps she had the right to choose her own path, regardless of duty or expectation. Spring came to London, bringing with it a sense of renewal and possibility. Eleanor remained at Berkeley Square, but her relationship with Adrian had shifted into something new and undefined. He called on her regularly, always respectful, never presumptuous. They took walks in Hyde Park, attended lectures together, had long conversations about books and ideas. Slowly, carefully, they were learning to know each other as people rather than as husband and wife. James continued to be a steady presence in Eleanor's life as well. He never pressed her for more than friendship, but his affection was clear in every word and gesture. Eleanor found herself caught between 2 very different futures, unable to choose between them. Then, one April morning, everything became clear. Eleanor had agreed to accompany Adrian to Ravensmoor for a brief visit. She hadn't been back to the estate since leaving for London in October, and she felt a mixture of trepidation and curiosity as the carriage rolled through the familiar gates. The house looked different somehow, less oppressive than she remembered. Or perhaps she was different and saw it through new eyes. Adrian had arranged for them to have separate chambers, respecting her need for space. That evening they dined together in the small family dining room, rather than the formal one, and the atmosphere was almost comfortable. After dinner, Adrian suggested a walk in the gardens. The spring evening was mild, with the scent of apple blossoms heavy in the air. They walked in companionable silence for a while, and then Adrian spoke. "I've been thinking about the future," he said. "About what you said in London. About choosing your own path. Yes? I want you to be happy, Eleanor. Truly happy. And I've come to realize that I may not be the person who can give you that happiness, not after everything I've done." Eleanor's heart clenched. "Adrian, let me finish, please." Adrian stopped walking, turning to face her. "Dr. Whitmore is a good man. He cares for you deeply, and he treats you with the respect and kindness you deserve. If you wanted to seek an annulment or a divorce, I wouldn't contest it. I would give you your freedom." Eleanor stared at him, shocked. "You would do that?" "I would do anything to see you happy, even if it means letting you go." For a long moment, Eleanor didn't speak. She thought about James, about his warmth and his kindness, about the life they could build together. It was tempting, so tempting. But then she thought about Adrian, about the broken man who had finally found the courage to be vulnerable, to admit his failures, to put her happiness above his own desires. She thought about the conversations they'd had over the past months, the slow rebuilding of trust, the tentative connection that had begun to form between them. And she realized that she didn't want to leave. Not yet. Not when they had finally begun to truly see each other. "I don't want a divorce," she said softly. Adrian's eyes widened. "Eleanor, you don't have to. I'm not saying this out of duty or obligation. I'm saying it because I want to. Because I think we deserve a chance to build something real now that we're finally being honest with each other. Are you certain? After everything I've done, I'm not saying I forgive you completely. I'm not saying everything is suddenly perfect. But I am saying that I want to try. If you're willing to meet me halfway, to truly be a partner rather than a distant stranger, then I think we might have a chance." Adrian took her hands in his, and Eleanor felt the tremor in his grip. "I swear to you, Eleanor, I will spend every day for the rest of my life proving that I'm worthy of your trust. I will never take you for granted again. I will never make you feel small or worthless. I will—" Eleanor placed a finger on his lips, silencing him. "Show me, Adrian. Don't tell me. Show me through your actions, through your choices, through the way you treat me every single day. That's all I ask." "I will," Adrian said, his voice thick with emotion. "I promise you, I will." Chinan. They stood together in the garden as the sun set, the sky painted in shades of pink and gold, and for the first time since their wedding day, Eleanor felt a flicker of hope for their future. The following months were not easy. There were difficult conversations, moments of doubt, times when old wounds reopened, but gradually, day by day, Adrian proved himself. He listened when Eleanor spoke. He valued her opinions. He made time for her, not out of duty, but because he genuinely enjoyed her company. He was patient with her fears, understanding when she pulled away, gentle when she allowed him closer. And Eleanor, for her part, learned to trust again. She learned that vulnerability was not weakness, that opening her heart did not mean surrendering her strength. She learned that Adrian, beneath his cold exterior, was a deeply wounded man who had never been taught how to love or be loved. And she learned that healing was possible even after years of pain. James, when Eleanor told him of her decision, was gracious and understanding. "I want you to be happy," he said, echoing Adrian's words. "And if you found happiness with your husband, then I'm glad for you. But Eleanor, if you ever need a friend, I'll always be here." "Thank you, James, for everything." By the time summer arrived, Eleanor and Adrian had settled into a new rhythm. They spent their days working together on estate business, Eleanor bringing her intelligence and organizational skills to bear on problems that had long been neglected. They spent their evenings reading aloud to each other, discussing ideas, simply enjoying each other's company. And slowly, tentatively, they began to rebuild the physical intimacy of their marriage, but this time with tenderness and mutual respect rather than cold duty. One evening in late July, as they sat together in the library at Ravensmoor, Adrian looked up from his book and said, "I love you, Eleanor." Eleanor's breath caught. It was the first time he had said those words. "I know I have no right to expect you to say them back," Adrian continued. "I know I've given you every reason not to love me, but I needed you to know you are the most remarkable person I've ever known, and I love you with everything I am." Eleanor set down her own book, her heart full. "I love you too, Adrian, not the man you were, but the man you're becoming, the man you've chosen to be." Adrian crossed the room and knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "I don't deserve you. Perhaps not, but you're trying to, and that's enough." Oh, they kissed then, a kiss full of promise and hope and the possibility of a future they would build together, not as strangers forced into marriage, but as partners who had chosen each other despite everything. Outside, the summer sun set over the Derbyshire hills, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, and inside Ravensmoor Hall, two people who had been lost in darkness finally found their way to the light. Years later, when people asked Eleanor about her marriage, she would smile and say, "It wasn't easy. We had to learn how to love each other, how to trust each other, how to be honest with each other. But the struggle was worth it, because true love isn't about perfection. It's about choosing each other every single day, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." And Adrian, standing beside her, would take her hand and add, "I was a fool for many years. I let fear and pain dictate my actions, and I hurt the one person who deserved only kindness. But Eleanor gave me a second chance, and I've spent every day since trying to be worthy of it. That's what real love is, the courage to be vulnerable, the strength to admit your failures, and the grace to forgive." Their story became a quiet legend in Derbyshire, a reminder that even the most broken relationships could be healed with honesty, patience, and genuine effort. And though they faced challenges in the years to come, as all couples do, they faced them together as true partners. For Eleanor had learned that she was strong enough to demand the love she deserved, and Adrian had learned that true strength lay not in emotional control, but in the courage to feel, to be vulnerable, to love without reservation. Together, they had transformed a marriage of duty into a partnership of equals. And in doing so, they had found not just happiness, but something far more precious, the freedom to be their authentic selves, fully known and fully loved. If you enjoyed this story of transformation, resilience, and second chances, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear which part of the story resonated most with you and where in the world you're listening from. Your support means everything, and it helps me continue bringing you these emotional journeys. Thank you for listening. And until next time, remember, it's never too late to choose love, to choose honesty, and to choose yourself.